On today's show, the Los Angeles Dodgers aren't the only ones to add a superstar outfielder to their organization because Will Myers is coming back to the Padres.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network in the business for January 16th, a Friday. We love that. Fun Friday, or not so fun Friday if you've been following baseball news. As always, I'm your host with sometimes the most, Javier Reyes, and I've been covering this team for 6 years now, soon to be 7, not just for this podcast, but various other outlets, including justbaseball.com, chief among them. Today's episode, guys, is brought to you by FanDuel. The wildcard round, it's gone. The divisional round, it's oh so here. And FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your Profit Boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Be sure to go check that out, guys. On today's show, we got to talk about some Padres news. First and foremost, some new hires, some weird reports and rumors about Nolan Arenado. And, of course, because it's Fun Friday, I know what you guys want. You guys want me to rant about the Dodgers. We're going to touch on a little bit the Kyle Tucker bombshell signing that the team just pulled off and what it says about the league and how I'm going to talk about it, all that sort of stuff. And to close out the show, because it is Fun Friday and I want to be silly, we're talking about one of the comments that offered a very silly trade. That's right. And remember, you can leave your comments in the comment section of the YouTube channel. So be sure to do that, especially for next week when I will answer a bunch of your different questions. But let's get into it, guys. Firstly, let's talk about some news, official news for the Padres. They hired Bud Black. That's right. And Will Myers reuniting Bud Black with the Padres, who managed the team from 2007 to 2015. He will serve as senior advisor to baseball operations. And Will Myers is also being brought back to the Padres, but no, not in a playing role, despite the fact that he is clearly not at the age of when you're expecting. He's not at the age where it's because he had to retire. It's because, well, frankly, he just didn't seem to have any stops left. But he is joining the Padres in a special assignment coach. That's what role he's going to be in player development. Really, really fun. Go look up the article on The Athletic by Dennis Lin talking about all of this stuff, how he'll be kind of, he's worked with some organizations, minor league hitters, guest instructors in the AFL, the Arizona Fall League, right? Like, he's got a bunch of different things there. This is just fun news. It's just fun. And frankly, I think it's really fun considering that I think Bud Black was just the manager for a team during a really rough stretch for the Padres from 2007 to 2015. I mean, the only thing that I could really say about that period is just that Chase Headley had an insane one season, and that also, I guess, let's say the Andrew Kashner trade didn't go very well for the Padres. Other than that, right? Like, there's not really all that much here. And he managed the Rockies, but the Rockies are a mess. So he's one of those guys where I feel like it's kind of just been really hard to evaluate his career, because you entered with the Padres, you're the manager, but that was pre-Preller nuclear explosion. And then you were with the Rockies, who are one of the worst run organizations in the entire sport. Worse than even when the Padres were run poorly. That is the Colorado Rockies. So it's hard to evaluate him. I just think that this is fun little news. And it's always great to see Myers back with the organization. He is so fascinating to talk about because of how beloved he is, despite being one of the first big contracts that the Padres spent that didn't really pan out the way that they would have hoped. He wasn't a horrible player, but he certainly wasn't the star that he could be, and was frankly a lot more useful in fantasy baseball leagues, right? Because of his, dual home run steal ability. I think he had 28 home runs, 28 steals 1 year, and that was huge in roto leagues for fantasy baseball for any of my nerds out there. But I don't think that this is the type of news that is going to mean anything in particular for the team going forward in free agency this offseason. But it's just fun. It's just fun. And I think that it shows that Preller is interested in maybe even potentially looking back and considering some other options in terms of just, hey, yeah, this guy didn't end up working, but maybe he was a pretty good manager, so why not bring him in some sort of role? Adding different people who might be talented is always a good thing. And I do think that while Myers, it mostly feels a little bit ceremonial for his from his perspective, right? That he's going to be with the team. It's still really cool. And I imagine that there's going to be a fun moment with him incorporated in some way in a conference or whatever, that'll at least give us some fun memes to talk about going forward. And then Bud Black in a little role that he is in specifically, as I said before, the role of senior advisor to baseball operations. That's just cool. Add all the people that you think are talented that you can. But again, not that big of a deal in the greater scheme of things. What I do think is a little bit of a bigger deal is that after the signing, or I'm sorry, after the trade of Nolan Arenado to the Arizona Diamondbacks, Nolan Arenado, who sometimes gets a lot of crap from Padres fans because they, for some reason, can't stand the idea that he's good and probably was better than Manny Machado for a stretch. Offense was a little bit inflated because, of course, but it's still a great player. He got traded to the Arizona Diamondbacks. And one of the things that actually came out during this, and you could check out I think was it Ken Rosenthal that I believe wrote about this sort of thing, and just the whole what's it called, the fact that there are other teams potentially and some updates on other teams across the league. And one little nugget that was featured in this was hilarious, and it was that apparently the Padres really wanted Nolan Arenado, but specifically at first base. That's right. Obviously, with Manny Machado at third base, and then you have Song, obviously the new international signing, going to be a utility player. The Padres were pretty entrenched at that side of the infield, and they wanted him to play first base, which is, look, my reaction to this was very, like, first of all, it's very funny that after all these years of Padres and Arenado discourse between him and Manny and who's better and blah, 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 blah. I think it's very funny that they apparently really wanted him. It sounds to me like the Cardinals really just wanted to dump this guy, because that's what the Cardinals are doing this day. They're just not an organization that clearly intends to try anymore, despite having a really, really poor division for much of the last 10 years. They don't really care about winning anymore, right? That's what's happened. That's why they hired Chaim Bloom. They're just kind of offsetting and getting rid of players, and they're rebuilding, right? Not rebuilding to win, rebuilding just to kick the can down the road and get tickets from fans for no reasons, right? So the Cardinals stopped trying. And that perspective, I can understand why AJ Preller was like, well, if we could get Nolan Arenado for basically nothing, that sounds great. But reportedly, they just weren't going to be down with absorbing as much of the cost. And I think that makes sense, frankly, because yes, I wouldn't mind having Nolan Arenado on the team for basically nothing. But I think that putting him at first base, his value these days is probably as a defensive specialist. Right. So while some people might see this news and say, dang, we could have had Nolan Arenado, he's a lot more name value, right? Last year in 107 games, granted, didn't play a full season. He slashed 237 with a 289 on base, 377 slugging, all like career worst, right? 84 WRC plus. His only value basically came from his defense, in which he produced still 6 defensive runs saved and 3 outs above average. He was still a very good defender, but that was at third base. Right. So even if the Padres were able to say, no, we're not going to really be interested in paying all that much for Arenado, but we'll give you a prospect because we know you want him so badly off the team. Like, I just don't understand what he could have offered at first base, especially because first base, you're going to really want some power. You're not going to want defensive excellence at first base, as we've talked about on the show a lot. First base is, if you had to choose a position to be bad at defensively, it's probably first base. You want power, you want a lot of offense coming from that position. And for the Padres, that would be even worse than having Jake Cronenworth at first base, right? Like, I'm just not confident that Arenado could be all that effective. Could he pull the ball at Petco Park? That's where he's, done the most damage in his career, is by being a pull ball hitter. I could see that potentially, but overall, it feels like you'd be wasting him on this Padres team, while the Diamondbacks can at least hope for maybe a bounce back season and at the very minimum, excellent defense over at third base. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense. And frankly, it says that the Padres are just in a weird spot. They're just trying everything and anything that they can. And it's mixed results, some might say. But it's going to be interesting to see what they end up doing at first base. Because if there's anything that this signifies, is that they do want to try and get someone different at first base to take the burden off of Jake going back there, or Gavin Sheets playing there every day, having him focus at DH. So we'll see how that transpires. But let me tell you, when it comes to adding new talent, the Los Angeles Dodgers are unfortunately still king. And yes, it is time for a Javi rant. But before we do that, guys, let me tell you first about our title sponsor, that is FanDuel. And with the divisional rounds all the way here, we love that. We love the divisional rounds in football, guys. They are in playoff mode, and every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action That's right. Every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. The boosts give you more juice on the bets you already like instead of forcing you to bet something new. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. So go check it out. Make your picks. Apply your profit boost to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling and continue to get rolling and roll until infinity and beyond, perhaps. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL game day. Go check it out. And just like that, everybody, we are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Padres your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the number one sports podcast network. And if you haven't already, which I haven't talked about a lot of the show, but go check out our new Everydayer Club, right? You get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Padres, compatible with Apple, Spotify, whatever other podcast app that you use, and an invite to the members-only Discord. Right, the Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of this show. Go check that out, guys. Go check out the URL, lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer club, and go check that out. I will be starting to get that a little bit more active as we get through the off season and all that sort of stuff. So go check that out, ad-free and a group chat. Why not? It's fun. So go check that out, guys. But now that we're back here on Locked On Padres, let's talk about Kyle Tucker going to the Los Angeles Dodgers. Reportedly, the Mets basically all of yesterday. And as you know, we are 3 days during the off-season period of Locked On Padres. We'll be back a little bit more 5 days a week in February. But for now, I must say, the reports were that the Mets were making a big push. And it sounds like they did offer a pretty big deal. Apparently 4 years, 200 is what I saw. But ends up going 4 years, $240 million. That is an AAV of $60 million in the sport. That is, I believe, the highest AAV of any player. I'm going to check that right now, actually. I got to see this. I got to see if there's a, let me see, leaderboard. Let me see. Is it Kyle Tucker? It's got to be Kyle Tucker in terms of AAV. No, it is still Shohei Ohtani, although Shohei Ohtani's average annual in terms of going against the salary cap, I think, is a little bit different. I believe it's like 48 million. And I could be wrong about that, though. Dodgers fans that I assume are going to check this video and talk about how much losers we are, and they're going to try and justify why this is interesting. You guys can let me know in the comments. I could be wrong, because I know that the deferrals make it that they're not paying him a certain amount every year, but I think that it still counts like 40 million to the payroll. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. But what I want to talk about here really quickly is, first of all, also David Sampson reported that, there were some, David P. Sampson reported that there were deferrals, which made me think, okay, maybe they're going to do some deferrals to make the AAV look a little bit less crazy. But no, in fact, it's still going to be about 57 a year, right? Even with the deferrals. I think that there's so much to talk about here, I think, with Kyle Tucker. The first thing I'm going to do is brag, because I was getting, really weirdly, a lot of negative comments about a month after the season ended, when I was talking about some of the big free agents and how I said that Kyle Tucker is probably on the short list. His short list is probably the Dodgers would be one of the front runners, right? I know that the Mets are out there, and we clearly just learned that they were out there, but I thought the Dodgers were on the short list, and I got so much crap from Dodgers fans for bringing this up. I was basically like, they're really rich. They have been spending on every best free agent for like the past 8 years, give or take a few years. And they also need outfield help. Yeah, they're probably one of the favorites to like Kyle Tucker. And I got a lot of crap. One of those comments was from at Garl Vinland 9490, who says the idea that the Dodgers hand out blank checks as the top free agents every offseason is a parroted surface level take. They didn't sign Soto, Judge, or Turner. Seager in 22, Cole in 20, Harper in 19, or Hosmer in 18. Just kidding. Of course, shot at the Padres. The only free agents they've signed at or above the money being speculated for Tucker are Ohtani, a unicorn, and Yoshi, a phenom. They also acquired Mookie, but he was a trade and an extension. Maybe they do spend big money on Tucker, but it would indeed be a shift in how they traditionally spend big money on free agents. No, it's not. And this is why I was right, and why Dodger commenters on the internet are really stupid, right? Not their fans necessarily, but the internet ones that are obnoxious are very stupid. Like, you signed Trevor Bauer. You signed Freddie Freeman. By the way, trading for Mookie Betts, you also then signed him for like a 14-year deal, like, give or take. Was it 14 or 13? I forgot. 14-year deal. Then you also signed Blake Snell to a big deal. You also signed Yamamoto. I love that, like, the idea that, like, we just can't count those guys. You also had Yamamoto and Shohei. And then you also had Blake Snell. And you also had Tyler Glasnow. And now you have Kyle Tucker, right? This is I'm going to talk about, I think, a little bit more next week. I want to break down the state of baseball. I know a lot of people who have been defending the Dodgers that are a little bit more concerned about this one. Only because 60 billion or 57 billion, if you want to do the deferrals, AAV is pretty. That's tough, even for the cheap teams. I do think that there are other teams that could have spent. I do think that the biggest issue with the sport is still the cheaper teams, like the Reds, who reportedly, if they didn't get Kyle Schwarber, they were out. They just thought that he would increase ticket sales. Like, there's a lot of Neanderthal cheap, greedy owners running the sport. I say Neanderthal because the case of the Reds, like the idea that Schwarber is a draw and that'll bring in ticket sales instead of like, what if we made our team with a really diehard fan base, one of the 7 or 8 original Major League Baseball teams that are still operating, if we just made our team sick and started spending like the Padres, that we could become a really big deal. The idea that it's just Schwarber could help you is insane, and I think a bigger problem with the sport. But again, I want to save a lot of the slander for next week because, again, everyone who's upset about this, remember, Dodgers fans are going through their own inner turmoil. They love winning, don't get me wrong, but they'll never admit it, but they know deep down that it's hard for them to convince themselves that it's interesting what they've been doing, right? Like in a lot of different ways. But we'll save some of the slander next week and have a really, I think, in-depth conversation about where the state of the sport is. But I do want to end with this. I think more interestingly than the Kyle Tucker and the Dodgers ruining the sport, blah, blah, blah. I think more interestingly is that I am wondering if this signing, for as much money AAV wise that they just gave him, and it makes sense why Kyle Tucker did this. I'm not hating on him. You get $60 million a year, and then you're also going to be able to re-enter free agency at age 32 and then probably sign with the Dodgers again. But no, I'm kidding. But I do think the most interesting thing about this is I wonder if a reason the Dodgers did this, given that the Mets were heavily favored and all that stuff, I'm wondering if they did this because they're like, salary cap is basically a guarantee with the lockout, right? With the lockout next year, I think that a lot of owners are going to be pushing for a salary cap, and they're going to have a lot of public opinion on their side, which I disagree with. I still think that the biggest issue with baseball, or at least let's say what led to the Dodgers, and maybe it's Pandora's box and you can't close it now, but cheap Neanderthal owners not doing anything for decades and Major League Baseball not fixing that, whether it be salary floor or whatever, I do think is the bigger issue. But I do wonder if the Dodgers were like, all right, screw it. We might as well just spend what we can right now. So I'm expecting them to be heavy competitors for whatever the other top free agent is on the market. Bo Bichette just signed with the Phillies, so not him. They don't really have a shortstop need. But could they just throw money at Framber Valdez and say, screw it? Why not? I could see that. Right? Because remember, they actually freed up money this offseason by getting rid of a bunch of players. I think Chris Taylor, Michael Conforto are some. So they actually are going to have a slightly less payroll than last year. But or I could be wrong about that, but they're going to have payroll that isn't as astronomically higher because they were able to get rid of, I know Michael Conforto was getting paid $17 million this past year. So they do have a little bit extra to spend in that regard. But it's going to be a lot of discourse. It's going to be a lot of discussions about the Dodgers for the foreseeable future. And I think that it's really important to remember that there are so many facets of this. Number one, which is like, yeah, the Dodgers fans are annoying and they stink. They're boring as heck, right? And I think that there is a certain degree of, wow, yeah, no one can compete with this. Not every team has a like $340 million deal, right? You know what I mean? Not everyone has Shohei Ohtani by himself, nearly paying back his contract with all the sponsorships and all that stuff that you get. Not every team is a big market in general, historically, right? So when people bring up the Padres overpay for guys, the Dodgers don't necessarily have to do that because they have all these different sponsorship opportunities and whatnot when you're part of the Dodgers, right? It's the same reason why someone might want to sign with the Dallas Cowboys over, say, the Jacksonville Jaguars, whatever, right? It's just a different breed. It's a different organization. It's a different standard when you are in the Dodger blue, right? So that's going to be real interesting. And on top of that, I just think that the TV deal, all the things that happened to them back in the day to make them a bigger environment set up by the league, I do think is hurting them. But it's also important to remember that the smaller, cheap teams are what I think have really killed the sport the most. Because if you look at the past 30 plus years in baseball, you have to be in the top half of payroll. You don't have to be number one. You don't even have to be top 5. But when you're in the top half of payroll, you have a chance. So that shows you, you know what's a bigger deal? The Reds not signing Kyle Schwarber. You know what I mean? Like, that's the bigger deal, is them not going out and getting a big time free agent to help get the ball rolling. You know what I mean? Give them a fighting chance instead of just kicking the can down the road, as so many teams tend to do, right? But I have to admit, I don't know how this is going to pan out, because I really do feel like this one was a little bit different, right? Back-to-back champs, I get that, but no one can match their TV deal. And that's one thing that is objectively empirically true. How do you fix that? I'm not sure, but Major League Baseball has been just kicking the can down the road themselves for way too long. And now we have a situation where I don't think it's a question of competitive balance as much as interest balance. It is not healthy for a sport when you only have 4 teams that get to do the fun stuff, which is spend on big stars, right? Like, guess what? In football, with the salary cap and all that stuff, you at least have teams that are like, hey, I get to be excited when free agency starts that we're going to get maybe not a new quarterback. The sexy positions aren't necessarily there, but we get to go and sign a great all-pro center to help our offensive line. Like, there's more intrigue there. And I think that it is a bad product when there's just 4 or 5 teams that get to have fun, get to sign these big stars, big personalities in some cases, and then other teams who are like, well, I hope our 18-year-old ends up good in 6 years. That's not good, and I don't know how sustainable that is for baseball. But again, it is very, very complicated, and we'll talk about that more next week with potentially a special guest joining the show. But I haven't locked that down yet. But we're not done, guys. We also got to talk about some fun mock trade ideas, and maybe I'll write about the Dodgers a little bit more just for fun and just in case people don't end up seeing that episode next week. And just like that, everybody, we're back here on the Locked On Padres podcast. Hopefully my rambling in the last segment made sense. I'm sure the Dodgers fans will find ways to pick it apart and say, oh, we're the best. You know what I mean? We're great. But nonetheless, I'm going to talk more about that next week and try and give as comprehensive of a breakdown of my feelings on the state of baseball as I can. And the only question I will say, though, before you type it out and people say, well, Javi, you wouldn't be complaining if the Padres did this. Yes, I think there's a difference between the team that has never won, a team that has not been historically always in the top 6 or 7 of payroll, and has never, like I said, won a World Series. I think it is cooler when that team goes out to do something. The same way I think it'd be cooler if the Reds signed a big, big deal like this to Kyle Tucker than the Dodgers, Yankees, Mets, etc. Right? Mets is a little bit different only because they haven't won in so long that it's like, yeah, I feel for them. But you get what I'm saying, right? Yes, I do think there is a team difference between team that has never won versus team that always wins. My apologies, but kill me for that. But on today's show, let's talk about the Mets. We got a comment from one of our listeners at Darren Michael 7978 said a Mets Padres mega swap. And I'm going to break this down a little bit. But he said the Mets will receive Fernando Tatis Jr., Nick Pivetta, and Xander Bogaerts. In exchange, the Padres will receive Francisco Lindor, right-handed pitcher Nolan McLean, outfielder Carson Bench, right-handed pitcher Brandon Sprout, and Jacob Reimer, first base, third baseman. In terms of a bunch of prospects, I think the idea of trading, like, here's the thing. I just want to let everyone know that you can't trade Xander Bogaerts. Like, it's just not happening. Unless Xander Bogaerts has like 2 straight years where he's a 5-6 win player, then you could trade him. But then it's like, well, why would you want to trade him? He's really great. He's back to what he was before he signed the contract. I think we really need to stop with the whole, I'm going to start banning trade ideas on this channel that involve sending a bad player / bad situation, because I do still think that Xander Bogaerts can be a positive player, not relative to his value, of course, but I still think he could be a positive player. But I'm going to stop responding to trade ideas that are like, hey, we'll give you Xander Bogaerts and Eric Hosmer in exchange for prospects. Like, no one wants to do that, right? Unserious idea. Xander Bogaerts' contract is unfortunately untradeable, right? So at this point, you have to hope that you can get him back to being a positive player. He was 3 wins above replacement last year. That's not nothing, right? And and at one point he was one of the 20 best players in baseball. Like, he was really, really playing well at points last year before the injury. So again, enough with that. Number 2, you're not getting McLeod for Mason Miller, right? Like, you're not even getting McLeod for that. He's a top level pitching prospect. The Mets love him. And Francisco Lindor, I personally think that the Tatis Lindor rumors are very slow off season, slow news day vibes. I think that there's a world in which the Padres trade Tatis, but that has to come with a lot of losing, right? And a lot of negativity, right? So like if the sales start going down, if the Padres fan base starts to evaporate, if the vibes dwindle so low and they start being a 70-win team, then maybe you can talk about the Tatis trade a little bit. But for now, what I look at is that guy's the face of your franchise and is basically they haven't had a player of this caliber to lead a franchise since probably Tony Gwynn, frankly. You could argue Trevor Hoffman. I get that. You could argue Adrian Gonzalez. I get that. But in terms of popularity, not just talent on the field, he is all the way there. So that's not happening. And Francisco Lindor has also been probably the best shortstop in Mets history. And he's still been very, very good. And he's still a leader of that team. And one of my favorite personal players, Puerto Rican Power, of course. But that's not happening either. I do think that there's a world in which the Padres trade Nick Pivetta. I've been saying this for a while, and I think that it also makes sense in some regards. But of course, I do believe that there is part of these rumors baked into it is Preller's trying to get a lot for him. He's not just trading to trade him, right? This is not the Nolan Arenado situation we talked about at the beginning of the show. I think he's looking for like a team to overpay and be like, we'll give you 2 young pitching prospects, maybe even throw in a major league ready player, right? Because we love Pivetta that much. We love what he did last year. He's a baller. Bring him in, sub-3 ERA. And Preller might be saying, okay, I'm only doing that if I get that type of offer. Otherwise, I'd rather just hang on to Pivetta this year and figure out the rest later, right? But I think getting some depth, getting free of what is a very player-friendly contract, I think could behoove the Padres. I think it would behoove them to consider that option. So I do think that part of this deal makes sense. I'm not sure if you could get just a Brandon Sprout, maybe for Nick Pivetta. I like the idea I talked about with my guy Ryan Finkelstein a couple weeks ago about Kodai Senga and potentially getting Mark Vientos, a mixture of those players. Maybe you can get Jonah Tong. I think that that is really, really exciting. Get high value, high potential players that are not going to kill you salary cap wise as much as other players on this team currently are. Just give you a little bit more flexibility. So I do think Nick Pivetta being traded is great. But again, I'm done with the trades that are like, hey, we're trading Tatis. Actually, I do like talking about the Tatis trades a little bit because I think there is a world in which it makes sense as a purely baseball thing where you're like, trade away this guy, you save a lot of money. You're going to get like $30 million or so in free cap space potentially that you could spend on a bunch of other different players, have it just open for whatever comes along and upcoming free agency classes, or even makes it more possible to trade for other players that might have a big salary that you can't afford right now. Like say Brian Bayo, who's getting paid something like $20 million in a few years. So don't know if the Padres can afford that. That's a bad example. I'm not saying they should get rid of Tatis so they can afford a Brian Bayo trade. You get my point though. But for as of right now, the idea of just trading him, I don't think makes too much sense, right? I think it'd have to be down the line for a lot of prospects. If they are shown to be a team that can't win anymore or win 90 games, that's when it becomes more of a real possibility. But for now, not going to entertain that. And I'm not going to entertain the trading Bogarts. Like, guys, it's not happening, right? You know how many times I got set? Well, let's trade Hosmer and then give a draft pick and then also pay his salary. That's just not worth it. You know what I mean? This isn't how baseball works or sports work in general. Like, you got to try and make it work. That's just the reality. You reap what you sow. And that's where the Padres are right now. But again, please send me your comments in the comment section below on YouTube. I'd love to hear back from you, not just on Kyle Tucker, not just on where you think the state of baseball is right now, but the Padres, what free agents they can go after, what trades you'd like them to make, because there's still plenty of stuff out there. I actually think it's been a fairly entertaining offseason. I really do. I actually think that this offseason has been really, really fun. The Padres still signed Michael King and Sungmin Song. Like, they have some cool stuff, right? Like, they even brought in Tristan McKenzie and Jose Miranda, like quirky little options that I think could be really interesting. And I still think that there's a world in which some of these pitchers, maybe a Zach Gallen, I could actually see. I could see, because he had such a down year, a Zach Gallen maybe be like, I'll take a prove-it-year deal too. I want to go out, ball a little bit. Maybe they do a Nick Pivetta type thing, and then you get yourself your 4-starter or 3-starter, whatever, like a back-end rotation option. Also, you could go out and take a chance on one of those back-end rotation options, right? You could go out and maybe try something with Frankie Montas if you think there's any way he gets back to what he used to be. You can go out and get Jordan Montgomery, a player who was just super damaged but can be really solid. And before he went to the D-backs, he was really, really solid as a back-end guy. we'll have to see. Nestor Cortez, he was disastrous this year. He had a lot of injuries. Maybe they re-sign him, right? And they get him at a cheap deal because maybe the money isn't out there for them, right? So we'll have to see. And also, especially the money might not be out there for them, considering that guys are going to want probably some more long-term deals, right? And maybe this part of the lockout being imminent next year, maybe that's part of why Kyle Tucker, right? Maybe that's part of why this deal got signed. Maybe they didn't want that. Although I did hear that other teams were offering long-term deals, but whatever. Maybe players are going to be like, yeah, I'll take some prove-it-year deal. Like, I don't know. I don't know how this is going to all break down. I'm not great at financials when it comes to baseball and levying, like the business side of baseball, I should say. That's going to be really complicated. But hopefully you guys are having a lovely day. Have a lovely weekend watching NFL playoffs. And before we leave, let me just tell you, thank you for listening to the podcast, but check out the Everydayer Club. Get Locked On Padres ad-free, plus member-only Discord access and more merch sales and deals, I should say. You get access to national bonus shows that you get as well. So really, really cool stuff. Go check that out. Locked On Padres at .supercast.com is the URL if you want mine. Obviously, you could go out and check out any other Locked On one, but you're Locked On Padres, so you should check that out. But yeah, next week, going to potentially have a guest on to talk about the state of baseball and the Dodgers, what we're feeling about that, right? We're going to have them on to potentially talk about the show. And my man, Jake Ariani, we might have him on next Friday as well for just a fun, what are the biggest questions for the Padres going forward? A little offseason update and state of affairs. So a lot of fun heading for next week. Enjoy playoff football. But until next time, stay safe. And of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies, take care.